The Hidden Hindu, Book 2 of the Trilogy by Akshat Gupta, Chapter 4, One Word and Two Lakes. After thoroughly examining the nature of Om's blood sample and obtaining full proof of its indestructible nature, Tej wanted to analyze its resistance against pathogens. He took Pooh, a healthy guinea pig he had in his lab and conducting experiments on, and injected it with the Marburg virus. Leaving it in the room, Tej closed the door behind him so the guinea pig wouldn't get out. Mrs. Butcher recounted. The room upstairs was chock full of plethora of high-end medical equipment and discreet medicines, but somehow still seemed empty. The light hum of beeping monitors filled the air. This was taken during those days, added Mrs. Butcher as she handed a picture of Prithvi. Prithvi saw the limp. Picture 2 Prithvi. Prithvi saw the limp. Tiny Mrs. Butcher on the bed, surrounded by medicines and monitors. Her body looked like it had been reduced to nothingness. I saw Tej enter the room with a comforting smile, and just for a moment I felt peaceful. I loved him. But the very next moment, the agonizing throb was back. My head swirled as a fresh wave of pain blurred my vision while my back muscles spasmed widely. Any outsider could have easily mistaken it for a seizure, but this was different. Despite the extensive research about multiple sclerosis, I was beyond the scope of being saved. Tej rushed the big compartment of medicines lined up in almost an army formation and took out an injection. He held my hand firmly down, and as the fluid flooded my veins, I was stable again. I mustered up a smile to make him feel better, but my eyes couldn't lie. Tej could see in them that he was losing me. My memory was fading away. He climbed into bed with me and held me like a baby. I lay there, numb, clueless about the treatment he was putting through me, even though he knew that no medicine could save me. For a few hours, Tej stayed beside me. His heart broke at the sight of my misery, but it shattered further at the thought of it all ending along with me. He clasped my hands tightly whenever the pain grew unbearable. I kept breathing and fighting just to live one more day of life with him. When he recounted the incident later, he shared what it felt like for him to be losing me. Pooh and I were at the same stages of our lives. We both barely breathed, we hardly moved, our vitals were deteriorating rapidly. Tej returned to his basement lab. He placed Pooh on his work table. It was time to test the miracle. Tej took a drop of Om's blood sample in a syringe and injected the dying guinea pig with it. The previously undefeated black blood cells were Tej's last hope. They had to come through. When Tej checked on the guinea pig again, it had stopped struggling and its symptoms seemed to be reducing in severity. Happy with the progress, he breathed a sigh of relief. He could, after all, save the love of his life. Mrs. Butcher took a break with a sigh and said to Prithvi, "Anyway, what happened next to Om and Nagendra?" Prithvi could gauge that she was hesitant to say anything further and needed more time to trust him fully, so Prithvi continued narrating his story. Hiking uninterrupted for days on end, Nagendra and his team crossed Kangma and Lhasa at dawn. The next stops were Zongba and Darchen, which brought them closer to Kailash Parbat. Meanwhile, on Kailash, the morning breeze was as chilly as ever, and the open field was all set for Om's first day of training. The sun's emerging red blended with the night's fading black seamlessly. Ashwathama brought Om to a makeshift rocky platform where an assortment of ancient metallic weapons had been placed upright. Om stood amazed and watched as they glinted in the dark. This setup was the complete opposite of his expectations. He had expected such weapons to have vanished forever along with the warriors who wielded them, or to at least be entirely rusted by now, if they had been preserved at all. But there they were, right in front of his eyes, along with one of the vanished warriors who had used these weapons once. Om carefully moved closer, his eyes scanning each one of those weapons minutely. Eventually, his gaze came to rest on a quiver full of arrows. He wondered out loud, What about those modern weapons that you had brought along to rescue me at the island? Those pistols and rifles were way more advanced and sophisticated than these simple arrows. Aren't you going to train me with those? Why have you brought... Suddenly, a tip of the arrow had just touched, sent him flying off 40 feet into the air. It was a millisecond more than 700 million volts. The kind found in a high-tension transmission wire traveled through the whole body and tossed him back to the ground like burnt toast. The shock was more than sufficient to kill an ordinary man, and Ohm, despite being Ohm, also barely survived. The right side of his body was completely charred, exposing the bones of his skin, exposing the bones that his skin was sticking to, and his nerves were as black as ink. He was so gravely wrecked that he could not get back to his feet. He lay on the ground grunting, trying to understand what had just happened. As Ohm's wounds healed slowly on their own, Ashwatthama clasped the same arrow in his hand, walked towards Ohm and explained, "Because today can never win over yesterday, and neither can tomorrow. The foundation of all science is ancient science, which is now mostly trapped in books scattered around the world. Many have even been destroyed. More than half of ancient science is yet to be discovered and deciphered. What is proclaimed to have been invented is actually just a discovery of principles and inventions that the ancient scientists, mathematicians, physicians, and engineers had already experimented with and written about millennia ago." Sushruta wrote the Sushruta Samhita, uniquely describing surgical training, instruments, and procedures, which is still followed by the contemporary science of surgery. Modern inventions are nothing but discoveries of science during the prehistoric ages, which the world calls mythology now. Planes in this part of the planet have flown way before the invention of so-called airplanes claimed by the Wright brothers in 1903. The distance between the Earth and the Sun, that is, had already been calculated and written in the Hanuman Chalisa aeons ago, even before my birth, not after 1653. We have been praying to the 9 planets since before the Ramayana, not after the invention of the telescope in 1608. Do you really think that people who wrote wrote and implemented intricate books like the Vimana Purana, which today's scientists have now started finding relevance in, have never contemplated the presence of Gardhavakarsan, which was later called gravitational force? Do you think that writing a comprehensive Purana on flying would have been possible without precise understanding of gravitational force? A Sanskrit verse from Brahmagupta's book says, "A body falls towards the earth as it is the nature of the earth to attract bodies, just as it is the nature of water to flow." This statement indicates Brahmagupta's grasp of the concept of gravity, which was later elaborated by another Indian astronomer, Bhaskara II, in his book Surya Siddhanta in 1150. All of this occurred way before Isaac Newton. Brahmagupta died in 668 CE, and Bhaskara II wrote his book in 1150. Newton's Principia, which describes gravity, was published in 1687, which was more than 500 years later. Contemporary science and modern artillery are no match for the knowledge of ancient science and the power of destruction that these ancient weapons possess. I used modern weaponry on Ross Island because those were the weakest among all the weapons I have mastered. They were enough to rescue you from humans, but what lies ahead cannot be fought with those toys. By this time, much of Ohm's tissues had been restored, but he still struggled to stand up on his feet. Ashwatthama bent and tied a Rudraksha on his unharmed left arm. With this, we start the Guru Shishya tradition. I will tell you each about all the astras I possess, Ashwatthama said as he initiated his teachings. Rule number 1, never touch a weapon that you have not possessed. You cannot hold it unless it allows you to. Imagine a furious saber-toothed tiger on a leash with its masters, Rikshkapi. What will happen if you try to hold the tiger's leash? The saber-tooth will tear you apart. He will never allow anyone but his master to come close to him. You can only interact with him after you befriend him. You can only order him once you have mastered him. These weapons, they submit to you, but before that you need to know them, learn them, and win them over. These weapons are divine weapons called astras, and the bearer of the weapons is called Astradari, which you are clearly not so far. By this time, the sun had risen higher in the sky, causing the shining metallic arrow to lose its radiance and turn into an ordinary corroded one, just the way Ohm had imagined earlier. I was aware of what you just told me about the Astras, but I didn't know they could still be in existence, Ohm replied, amazed. His remaining burns and abrasions continued to heal, and Ashwatthama gave him a hand to help him get back on his feet. Summoning an Astra requires the use of specific chant. Every Astra has a chant that commands and controls it. Once the chant is recited, the concerned god endows the weapon with divine power, making it impossible to counter by regular means. There are specific conditions for the use of Astras, the violation of which can be fatal. Because of the great power involved, the knowledge of an Astra is passed on in the Guru Shishya tradition from a guru master to the Shishya follower by oral instruction only, and only after judging the capabilities of the student. Certain Astras were so mighty that mere knowledge of the chant was insufficient, so they had to be handed down directly to the deity involved. The extensive use of Astras began during the time of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, yet not every warrior has Astras. You've met some of those who did. Ashwatthama was right. Ohm had indeed met some of them, including Lord Ram and Lord Lakshman, Bhishma, the son of River Ganga, Dronacharya, Ashwatthama's father, Karna, and spiritual son of the sun, and Arjun, the spiritual son of Indra. The three who still have Astras are Parashurama, Kripachara, and I. Om's eyes twinkled as the name of the third immortal of Hindu mythology fell on his ears. Kripachara, where is he? That is not known. He comes only when needed, and only I can summon him, Ashwatthama replied with a hint of pride. The celestial Astras are usually evoked using arrows, although they can potentially be evoked by any weapon or anything else. I invoked the Brahmashastra Astra using a blade of grass as my weapon. Indra's son Arjuna was capable of shooting all his celestial weapons with the power of his mind alone. He didn't need any physical vessel for the Astras to manifest in. Ashwatthama then brought Om back to the weapons and looked like incautious antique armaments in the sunlight. They were only empty vessels. Their power was channeled through the celestial Astras. These are some of the Astras that I possess, Ashwatthama said, picking up one in his hand. This is the Vayu Astra. It brings about a hurricane capable of lifting entire armies off the ground. On the 14th day of the war in Kurukshetra, when the battle continued past sunset, I used this weapon to breach the illusion that Anjana Parvan, the grandson of Brahma and the son of Ghatotkacha, had created. Ajana also used the Vayustra against Karna in the final battle. So saying, Ashwatthama put the arrow back in the quiver. Now sit down and meditate to invoke Vayu, the god of wind. This will take 5 whole days to prepare yourself. Repeat the chant after me. Ashwatthama sat down and started chanting, with Om repeating his words. The entire open field reverberated with their vibrations. The ground, the grass, the wind, the sky, everyone seemed like one being. Days passed and the chant echoed constantly on Kailash. Meanwhile, Nagendra and his team, with their heavily packed bags, passed Zongba and Darchin, inching closer to their final destination.